The prospect of GE trees and the corporations that are pushing this technology it's really breathtaking. I mean, they're looking at 184 million acres of forest around the world. So their dream is to cut down all those forests and instead have these industrial, monocultured, essentially tree factories. No insects, no birds, no ecosystem, no life. These trees aren't really even trees. Any natural behavior of a tree is inhibited. So imagine that. That's their dream. That is where they're going to make their money. Down go all the forests, up come these tree factories by millions and millions of acres, these monocultures, whether they're going to be eucalyptus or poplar. That's their dream. That's going to be all these trees that they're then going to cut down and plant every couple of years for fuel.
But the second biggest use for atrazine in the U.S. is in forestry. So when the trees are cut, my understanding is the atrazine is then applied aerially to prevent any weeds or competition from growing up while they replant the trees. Atrazine is the #1 contaminant of drinking water, surface water, rainwater, aquifers, groundwater, you name it, atrazine's in it. Atrazine is associated or correlated with a number of reproductive health problems in humans. So, for example, it's associated with low sperm count, it's associated with an increase in breast cancer, it's associated with an increase in prostate cancer, it's associated with at least 3 birth defects.
In 2009, the American Academy of Environmental Medicine reviewed the animal feeding studies and said these animals are so sick and suffering, no one should be eating GMOs. They're suffering from gastrointestinal problems, immune problems, reproductive problems, accelerated aging, organ damage, and problems with cholesterol and insulin. So we've seen since then more evidence that GMOs are unsafe, both at the laboratory level, among livestock that are switched from GM to non-GM or vice versa, and we can see the differences in their health, and to humans who've stopped eating GMOs, and they and their physicians, by the thousands now prescribing non-GMO diets, describe health improvements. So these are the kind of things we have to pay attention to long before we release anything that has genetically engineered pollen. Because once you release it, everyone in the environment, everyone in the area is going to be affected, especially those that are highly sensitive.
My name is David Suzuki. I am, by training and profession, a geneticist. And for 25 years, I had an active career in science, once having the largest genetics lab in Canada. In discussions I've had with my fellow geneticists, they often say, listen, Suzuki, we're just talking about DNA. DNA is DNA. What difference does it make what organism it comes from? We pull it out of this organism, put it into another, it's just DNA. They forget a fundamental fact. We study the genetics of organisms by breeding a male and a female of one species, looking at their offspring and breeding them through what is called vertical inheritance within a species. When you take a gene from one species and transfer that DNA into a totally unrelated species, that's a completely different kind of experiment. This is now called horizontal inheritance. We've never done that before, and it is absolutely bad science to say that we can look at vertical inheritance and use the same ideas to explain what goes on in horizontal experiments. It's just lousy science.
So it's made in a laboratory, and more often than not, they're inserting viruses or bacteria into these plants.
Why do they do that?
They do that because GMOs were designed to sell more chemicals.
Because I know the first engineered trees that were planted a lot in China, this Bt poplar, that means that these cryoproteins that could be in the pollen could be being inhaled by people, and there are potential health risks of that.
Introducing genetically engineered trees is kind of like looking at tree plantations on steroids, where you're going to be able to accelerate the turnover. It's going to take more pesticides, more herbicides, much more intensive management.
In the Philippines, there was a village right next to a Bt cornfield. And they woke up one day and there was a terrible stench from the cornfield, and one person was volunteered to go in and see what was going on. By the time he got to the middle of the cornfield, his face had swollen up and he could hardly breathe. And it took him a long time to recover. People started getting sick. Those who were living right next to the cornfield, and within a few days it spread to the rest of the village. Most of the village got sick, and people moved away, they got better. When they moved back, they got sick. A team came in to investigate. They found that the production of the Bt toxin, even on one corn cob, varied by 99-fold from one kernel to another. So maybe there was some genetic instability, maybe there was some unique problem with that. We don't know, because as most GMO research happens, it's thwarted. There's efforts to suppress it. But the same corn was planted in 4 more villages and similar problems happened. There was respiratory problems, flu-like symptoms. There was also unexplained deaths in humans and animals of those that ate the corn. And it was a lot of report on that in the news, but no real official investigation.
I think it's far less than 1% of what's actually sprayed hits the intended target, and the rest of that is just off in the environment. So aerial spraying, that's more of a risk for any farmers that are in the area or farm workers.
ISIS. It's simultaneously cool sounding and stands for pure evil, like Monsanto. Monsanto, who we recently learned puts an ingredient in Roundup, their ubiquitous crop spray, called polyethoxylated toluamine, that is far more toxic than anyone realized. Folks, ISIS isn't going to kill you. Things like polyethoxylated toluamine, that's what's going to kill you.
So here are the facts as we know them. 70 to 80% of foods we eat today contain GMOs. There's 1.1 billion pounds of pesticides a year that are used on these crops, in part because they are GMO and they're made to be able to survive this.
Dr. Oz, for a long time I didn't know that pesticides might be affecting my children. In fact, they had rashes and severe allergies for years. But then I learned that not only are GMOs sprayed with pesticides, but non-GMO foods are as well. And I learned that glyphosate kills gut bacteria. And I instinctively knew that that had to have something to do with my children's health issues. So we went not only GMO free, but organic to avoid pesticides, and my children's health got better.
So let's not call genetically engineered tree plantations forests, okay? Let's call them green deserts. Again, we have to be really clear about what we're talking about. There's no life there. It's just a factory. It's just an industry. And with all of its pollution and all of its problems, social problems. We have to put the culture back into agriculture. Because if you take the culture out of agriculture, all you've got is agribusiness. And that's what you have with your genetically engineered trees.
We submitted almost 40,000 public comments, so almost 10,000 to 1 people were commenting against the genetically engineered tree plantations. So the campaign has grown internationally and currently includes over 200 organizations in 49 countries all over the world who have united together to call for a global ban on the release of all genetically engineered trees into the environment.